Kevin, in your experience manning some of these large-scale infrastructure projects, especially roadway projects, what would you say are some of the most common issues that lead to disputes or cost delays? And what are some of the maybe investigative or project management strategies that you found effective for resolving some of these issues or minimizing them?
The biggest issues I saw as a construction manager almost always came down to cost. Cost is a driver for these claims. Time is money, so delays on a project are also cost related. And I think the issues that we saw rear their heads were unexpected site conditions or claimed unexpected site conditions.
Have you ever wondered how a tiny flaw in a roadway project can spiral into a multi-million-dollar dispute or even life-threatening failures? In today's episode, I'm joined by Kevin Gorman, licensed professional engineer, vice president, and civil engineering expert at Robson Forensic. Kevin's going to uncover some of the hidden problems that lead to infrastructure disputes and how forensic engineers get to the truth. We'll talk about real-world lessons from managing large-scale projects, strategies for preventing costly delays and mistakes, and how technology is transforming the way engineers investigate and present evidence. Whether you work in design, construction, or project management, you're going to walk away with practical insights to sharpen your technical expertise and strengthen your investigative skills. Now, before we jump in, I do want to tell you about our AEC PM Connect events. Interactive experiences where civil engineers can sharpen their project management skills through real-world sessions on topics like earned value, AI in project management, and risk assessments. Visit aecpmconnect.com and register today. We currently have events in Kansas City and New Jersey, with more coming soon. I'm your host, Anthony Pisano, and this is the Civil Engineering Podcast, the industry's leading show for civil engineering professionals, ranked as the #1 civil engineering podcast by FeedSpot. All right, now I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show for today. Kevin Gorman is a licensed professional engineer. He's a civil engineer and vice president at Robson Forensic. Kevin, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
So, Kevin, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of the journey that led you to your current role as a civil engineer VP at Robson.
It's actually kind of a unique background that I kind of had two separate career paths that I'll get into a little bit. But basically, it started with my interest in math and engineering, and which led me to Cornell University, where I got my bachelor's degree in civil engineering, and left Cornell and went to work for the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, really as an intern engineer, as my first engineering experience. While I was at PennDOT, I did pursue my second career in law enforcement. So kind of had a little bit of back and forth between engineering and law enforcement a few times till ultimately I ended up with about 15 years of experience at Michael Baker. It was Michael Baker Jr. at the time, became Michael Baker International, was an engineering consultant company, and I worked for them as a civil engineer and construction manager. What's interesting is while I was there, I got an email just out of the blue from LinkedIn looking for a civil engineering expert, and I really had no idea what that was, but with my combined background in law enforcement engineering, it kind of piqued my interest. So ultimately, I explored it, had conversations with the people at the company, and ultimately basically took a leap of faith and joined Robson over 7 years ago as a civil engineer.
That's great. And for those not familiar with forensic engineering, how would you describe that for someone?
A lot of people ask me that question, and they all picture NCIS and, these labs and crime scenes and everything like that. And really, I think the forensic world that I live in is really just an investigation by people that know more than the average person in their average fields. So as a civil engineer, the forensic work I get into involves evaluating engineering related issues that go to litigation, whether it's crashes in a work zone, whether it's disputes over quality or contract issues that lead to cost claims. So really, the forensic aspect is an investigation into an event or a series of events, and then developing opinions as to how the event occurred and maybe who had some liability or not.
And when you talk about forensic engineering or taking a look at these items or issues, it could be done by engineers in different disciplines depending on the issue or the problem, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I think we have over 150 experts at Robson. We have mechanical engineers, civil engineers, structural engineers. We have nurses. We have biomedical engineering experts. So really just the to be able to testify as an expert in a area or in a discipline, you need to have the training, education, and experience in that specific discipline to be allowed by the courts to offer an expert opinion.
So, Kevin, in your experience manning some of these large scale infrastructure projects, especially roadway projects, what would you say are some of the most common issues that lead to disputes or cost delays? And what are some of the maybe investigative or project management strategies that you found effective for resolving some of these issues or minimizing them?
Sure, and actually in hindsight, it was an interesting parallel to those two careers. And during my work as a construction manager on highway and bridge projects, I got involved in investigating and defending many claims that were presented by contractors on behalf of the owner, which in this case was the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. And really, unbeknownst to me at the time, I was setting the foundation for my work here at Robson, where you get information from both sides. You develop evaluate the plan, the information, and ultimately see if you can come to an opinion. The biggest issues I saw as a construction manager almost always came down to cost. Cost is a driver for these claims. Time is money, so delays on a project are also cost related. And I think the issues that we saw rear their heads were unexpected site conditions or claimed unexpected site conditions that led to delays. Design errors, design omissions that required rework or redesign ultimately could lead to delays and additional costs for contractors. Issues with ambiguity in the contract, ambiguity in the specifications that allowed some multiple interpretations of how something should have been done. And I think the last part would be the quality of work issues, whether something met the specifications or not. And I don't think there's ever a way to be able to fully eliminate all claims, but processes that we tried to implement, such as partnering, look to establish early and good communication between the parties. We look to have clearly written specifications and contract language, and tried to create an overall atmosphere of treating each other fairly. And that went a long way into allowing a more amicable resolution to issues that may have arose during the project.
Transform your technical experts into impactful leaders with EMI's Engineering Leadership Accelerator. Tailored for AEC professionals, this program enhances communication, delegation, and decision-making skills. Flexible, interactive, and designed to fit your team's schedule. Elevate your team's leadership capabilities today. Visit engineeringmanagementinstitute.org and click on Corporate Training. That's great. Those are some really important points. And I know at EMI, we do a lot of kind of project management training and development programs for organizations. And I know that one of the bigger challenges in delivering projects successfully can be that ambiguity in scopes or deliverables. And, whether you're working, regardless of the size of your organization or what stage of civil engineering or project management you might be in, those early on scoping development, that kicking off your project process or kickoff meeting, those can be some really important points in a project to kind of clarify some of those things that Kevin referenced there that can come back to really bite you when you get into the project. And, you realize that those ambiguities, that's just going to cause probably confrontations and conflicts and other things. So I think as a civil engineer and as a project manager, you can help to minimize some of these things by setting up the project right from the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's as silly as it sounds, the three letters ETC period, short for et cetera in a contract may seem self-explanatory to someone running those specs, but when it comes down to actually delivering on that contract, that can open up a whole world of ambiguity and as to what was the intent of the et cetera. What did the et cetera include?
Yeah, it's true. And I may have mentioned this on the podcast before, but I had the privilege of interviewing a general in the U.S. Army who was a civil engineer, and he got involved with a lot of big mega projects for the military. And he said one of the best things he ever did as a civil engineer was take a course in contracts.
Yeah,
Just to
absolutely.
understand some of the little verbiage, like you mentioned, and that can mean one word or, et cetera, could really, have a big meaning on a multi-million-dollar project.
Yeah, I mean, the or and or all
Right.
could have a huge impact on which words you use.
Yeah. In fact, we've shown a slide before in our PM training programs where it's like what the engineer writes on one column and then how it's interpreted potentially by a contractor in another column. So again, these are all things to take into account. So, Kevin, we have civil engineers that listen to the show. They're both in the public sector as well as in the private sector. I know you've had experience in both. From your perspective, how do differences in project delivery between the public and private sectors influence things like quality control, accountability on projects, like just overall project outcomes? What are some of the differences you've seen?
Well, I don't think there's that much of a difference in the issue of quality control. The quality control comes down to having a systematic way of ensuring that you're meeting the standards that are required of you by the owner, by the project. And whether it's a private or public project, the owners are going to dictate what the requirements should be. And therefore both worlds should have an appropriate quality control program in place to meet those specific standards. Accountability, I think, again, is the same. There's both sectors have contracts, both sectors have requirements and expectations that contractors need to meet, and the accountability and the accepting the contract terms is part of, I would say, that the requirements, the accountability aspect for contractors. I think the biggest difference that I've come across is, as we know, most public sector projects are low bid. You select a contractor based on the lowest bid. Engineering or professional services are generally accepted or selected by a statement of interest. So there is some more subjectivity into selecting maybe an engineering firm. But for construction related, it's lowest bid, and you don't necessarily have that restriction in the private sector. You may be able to obtain references. You may be able to look at other projects a contractor did to get a feel subjectively on how this contractor is going to perform for you. But in the end, I think each firm that accepts the contract is accountable to meet the terms of that contract, and their quality control and quality assurance program should be developed such that they can do that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The difference between the lowest bidder and maybe more of a qualifications based bidding process. I know when I worked in the state of New York for a while, they really, at least for engineering, they really focused on qualification based bidding. So you would put your package together in one envelope, and then you would put your fee together in a second envelope, and they would open up all the qualification envelopes and select kind of the best firm. And then they would say, okay, you're the firm we've chosen. We're going to now take a look at your fee. And if it doesn't fit with our budget, we'll start by negotiating with you to see if we can get to something that works. And then if all that is exhausted, they might go to the next best qualified bidder. But, Kevin makes a great point. And a lot of times with a contractor, you're taking the lowest bidder. And if a contractor needs work, they just want to get in, they can put a really low bid out, and then the quality of the work could be really low. And then that creates a lot of these issues that Kevin and I have talked about for the last 10, 15 minutes in terms of the quality of the work and the issues that can arise, which is something to be aware of as someone who, whether you're, in charge of bids for a municipality, or maybe you're working at a private organization, like Kevin said, there may be more leeway in the private sector. Definitely some things to think about and be aware of.
Yeah, and absolutely the low bid. There's great contractors out there,
Sure.
that are very successful and do great work with the low bid process, but it does potentially afford itself to the, I won't say guarantee, but like increased likelihood that you're going to have a claim if they're cutting pennies to win the bid, then they may or may not look to recoup some of those costs through the claim process. It potentially lends itself to a more tenuous situation right from the start if contractors are forced to underbid or undervalue their work to get a job.
Yeah, and Kevin makes a good point. It doesn't mean that every low bidder is going to be a low quality contractor or professional or organization, but every now and then, like my wife is a civil engineer and works in construction, and she's had a couple of these projects where the low bidder even defaulted on a project, right? They just kind of went all in for this low bid, and then they just couldn't get it done. So it's definitely something to be aware of. And, hopefully some of the things we've been talking about today can kind of help you just to bring awareness around it. So, Kevin, forensic engineering often will require, kind of working at the intersection of technical expertise and then legal proceedings, like we kind of talked about earlier. What skills would you say are kind of critical for engineers who need to provide expert testimony or prepare technical documentation in that legal context or for legal use? What can you share on that based on your experience?
Sure, and that's a great question. And as we've talked about, I've actually had experience in both fields, from the engineering field to the legal field. And At the time I took the job with Robson, I really didn't know there was a world where they both existed in the same realm. But, other than maybe, my cousin Vinny and watching Marissa Tomei, be cross-examined and going through the voir dire process to
Right.
to to qualify her as an expert. But, really, the biggest thing that I found coming to this world, everybody we consider for candidates are already an expert in their field. Whether you're a licensed engineer, whether you're a PhD toxicologist, biomechanical engineer, you're already an expert in your field. And the transition really involves writing and public speaking skills. You need to be able to, our role in the legal system is the conduit between attorneys and the trier of fact. And the trier of fact could be a jury, could be a judge, but attorneys are not allowed to provide technical information to a jury. They need to hire an expert, a civil engineer in this case, to provide that technical information and technical opinions to a jury. So being able to do the technical work is one thing, but then being able to explain your opinions and explain what happened in a way that a jury or a judge could understand it, more in layman's terms, is a critical issue. I do a lot of report writing, 30, 40, 80-page reports, depending on the complexity of the case. I do a lot of testimony, whether it's deposition testimony or testimony in front of a jury where you're explaining them face to face your opinions and how you came to them. So really writing skills, speaking skills, and then the analytical skills as well, the desire, the passion to look to solve a problem, look to find out why something happened.
Interesting. So, Kevin, I have to ask you, we have AI technology tools now, advanced data collection, simulation software, different visualization methods. How has all of that technology changed the way that forensic engineers either analyze data or present evidence in some of these situations?
The AI aspect actually is raising an interesting point, an interesting dilemma that we're facing both in our field or in the legal field, in that there look most of the work we do has to be our work, has to be analyzed by us, processed by us, and presented by us. And this, I guess, workaround of having the possibility to have AI prepare some of that or do some of that is raising a lot of questions right now in the legal industry, such that I've heard of restrictions being in place where attorneys or experts are having to sign that they did not use AI to generate this report. They did not use AI to create this legal brief. So from that aspect, it's very challenging to be able to differentiate someone's own work versus something created by AI. And I think it's early enough and that they're still working through the details on how best to incorporate what we can and roll out what we can have AI used for.
Yeah, no, I can see how that would be important to keep an eye on for sure in terms of, cases like this where you've got a lot of stuff hanging in the balance. So that's something definitely to be aware of if you're getting involved more into forensics. So, Kevin, in some of these complex infrastructure cases that you deal with, there's obviously many stakeholders, there's contractors, there's different agencies, there's legal teams that maybe engineers don't often deal with if they're not in forensics. How do you kind of approach collaborating, communicating effectively with all these different stakeholders to make sure that there can be, a thorough and a fair and credible investigation that goes on?
Sure. And when I came to forensics, it's a field that truly is different than any field I'd been in, other than maybe law enforcement with, the testimony, stuff like that. But from a collaboration sense, it's each side is playing their cards very close to their chest. This is a battle between plaintiffs and defendants, where short of the discovery requirements, the legal discovery requirements to provide information back and forth, the collaboration really is not there between the parties. Everybody's looking to CYA, looking to protect themselves. So it's not quite the same as what I was used to trying to get a project to work together, where you pull all the parties together and you say, hey, let's make this work. How do we make this work better? Internally, obviously with our clients and communication with our clients and maybe any technical staff we use for certain analyses, communication is key. Developing a schedule and keeping, just like any project, keeping on schedule, making sure your deliverable is ready for the handoff to the next person. But yeah, it's truly almost like a poker game. We're going to hide our cards until we have to show them, and let the best hand win at the end of the case.
Yeah, I think communication and collaboration is key regardless of whether it's forensics, infrastructure projects, design projects, right? It's just so important in civil engineering and project management. And I think that what's interesting about civil engineering, maybe more so than other engineering disciplines, is you do have to also interact a lot with the public, right? And people that are not technically savvy, which can be even another challenge because now I'm trying to explain to you why I had to put a stormwater pond in your backyard or whatever the case may be, and people don't understand that. So I think that that's just critical for us as civil engineers across the board.
It is, and I would say the gatekeeper, so to speak, of ensuring quality work that we do and that we do a credible and thorough investigation is actually the rules of federal evidence. Everything we do for us to be accepted as an expert into the courts, we have to meet the federal rules of evidence, and that is a whole checklist of things from the qualifications of the expert to the facts and data that they relied upon to the uh, method on which they did their analysis. We use the scientific method in our analysis to the way the data is presented. All that has to meet that specific checklist of the federal rules of evidence to be admissible into the courtroom. So that helps ensure that credibility and thoroughness of the investigations we do.
That's great. So, Kevin, looking ahead, what would you say are some of the emerging trends or challenges that you see for the future of forensic engineering in general?
Well, I think a big one we had talked about was AI. That's a hot topic where we're looking to ensure, how do we ensure that the work we're doing is our work? The whole industry, since I've been there, everybody keeps getting better. Everybody keeps raising the bar on expectations, on quality of analysis, on quality of experts, on really everything that goes into a case from all sides. And the bar just keeps getting raised, and we just keep having to do better and better work to meet that bar and meet the requirements that judges are looking for, that juries are looking for, and the credibility that they expect or would like to see from experts that take the stand.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, it's something that if you're getting involved in this industry, these are some of the things that you need to pay attention to in terms of wanting to be the best you can be, working on these forensic type projects. And I guess, Kevin, the last thing to kind of wrap up on this topic before we go into our final segment here, what would you say is one kind of final piece of advice that you'd share with civil engineers that want to kind of get more into the forensic field? Like, what kind of skill sets do you feel that they should really focus on developing based on your experience?
Sure. I would think actually that advice would depend on what stage the civil engineer's in. Somebody graduating or just recently graduated, I would absolutely tell them to get their fundamentals of engineering certification, their FE, as soon as possible. While all that breadth of information from your 4-year degree is still fresh, take your FE exam, get that out of the way. Definitely look to get varied experiences. Even the civil engineering world itself is so varied, from sanitary to highway to traffic signals. Get as much and as broad of a breadth of experience as you can. And I would also suggest get as much hands-on experience as you can get. Many of the cases I get involved with involve whether or not the standard of care was met, and the standard of care is beyond the specifications. It's what somebody in that position would ordinarily do, reasonably do under those conditions. And if you haven't had hands-on experience in the field with it, whether setting maintenance and protection of traffic up, whether, putting together a bridge that you designed, if you don't have that hands-on experience, you may be limited or may be difficult for you to actually opine on what the standard of care should have been. So as you're getting that experience, that hands-on experience, absolutely look to get your PE as soon as you can. Once you get your professional engineering license, that credential, many states actually it's required. Some states allow reciprocity, but it's a key element to set you apart as a professional in your field. And then gain the experience. We look for people with maybe 10 years of experience or so, in their various fields with the hands-on experience. So really, I guess in a nutshell, know a lot about some things and know something about a lot of things in the field you're working in.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So what we're going to do now with Kevin is we're going to transition here into our final segment, which we call the civil engineering hot seat segment. We're going to pepper Kevin with a couple of final kind of rapid fire questions, career related. So you ready for it, Kevin?
Yes, I think so.
All right. So the first question for you is, do you have any like specific rituals or routines that you practice every day, whether it's a morning routine or a lunchtime routine, just something that's helped you in your career to be consistent and be successful as a professional?
Sure. This whole world of forensic engineering is just so rapidly changing with deadlines and court imposed deadlines and trials and stuff. So, in addition to being intellectually challenging, which is what I love about it, it's also emotionally challenging. No one gets in, we don't get called if something good happens. We get involved with many, many tragic situations and tragic events. And there can be a lot of travel involved. I have a national practice, so I have cases all across the country. So really the ritual, the thing that grounds me the most and allows me to disconnect is staying physically fit, staying physically active, before the day starts, allows me to disconnect mentally. I ref high school soccer in the fall and I enjoy the physical aspect of it. I was involved with soccer my whole life. And what I found is that the conflict that I face as a forensic expert, whether it's deposition testimony or trial from the other side, there's still that conflict in refereeing. So that doesn't really disconnect me from the aspect of conflict, where I think when I'm reffing, at best, I'll get half the people that think I made a good call, and at worst, everybody thinks I screwed up the call. So, but it's a good, so for me, physical activity and just disconnecting that way is how I get through it.
Yeah, and that's a good point that we didn't really get into much earlier, but something like forensic engineering can have a real emotional side of it that you may not have if you're someone who's, let's say, just designing a roadway and just focused on the calculations and not maybe interacting with people as much or people in a tragic situation. So I think that's something definitely to consider. So, is there through your career, Kevin, has there been, whether it was a book, an author, a training course, something that you consumed that helped you in terms of your personal development that's kind of stuck with you over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, kind of based on the phase of my career I was in, that varied. And obviously I think they call it the Civil Engineering Reference Handbook for your PE exam. I mean, that's
Yes.
still on my desk. I still open that on occasion and refer to things when I get into a case of varying different engineering topics. That's indispensable. And once you buy that, once you have that, you'll keep it with you for the rest of your career. Within the last couple of years, I actually read a book called Can't Hurt Me by the retired U.S. Navy SEAL David Goggins. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Oh, yeah, I'm
Yes,
familiar with
yes.
David Goggins. He's a very interesting and extraordinary guy if anyone
Yeah.
wants to
So
research him.
from that aspect to to inspiring someone to do better, to get the most out, to basically to overcome a challenge they're facing. That's an amazing book, just from an inspirational standpoint, that you can do almost anything you set your mind to it. And I think the last one in my role here as vice president, which, even though I'm still a very active civil engineering expert, I also now I'm wearing dual hats. I have the role of vice president and learning to be a good leader. So there's a book called The 5 Levels of Leadership by John Maxwell that I read to basically provide the foundation and even continuing reference to me on becoming a better leader, working up through. They have 5 levels of leadership, and working your way to be that leader that I strive to be. So I think those 3 books kind of really summarize my career path from basic civil engineer to overcoming challenges to now being a leader at Robson Forensic.
That's great. Yeah, John Maxwell's great. He's got some great stuff, and the 5 levels of leadership is really great as well, especially for those of you really, transitioning through some of those levels. It can be very helpful to understand what it takes kind of to continue to grow as a leader, which is really a never ending thing. You're constantly growing as a leader. So
Absolutely.
any help you can get is good. All right. The last question I have for you, we call it the civil engineering career elevator advice question. So if you got in an elevator with an up and coming civil engineer, let's say earlier on in their career, and you had about 30 to 40 seconds with them, what career advice would you give them in that short period of time?
I think we alluded to it a little bit. Obviously, get the training, get the education in the field that you enjoy working in the specialty you enjoy working in. Definitely get some time behind the desk. Get some time digging into the actual engineering, doing the designs, learning the standards, learning the design restrictions to which you're working within. And then lastly, I think most important is get out in the field, start building some of the things you've designed, get exposed to constructing bridges, constructing roadways. That really will help complete an engineer's whole package and give them, I guess, the ability to see how everything fits together. everything looks good on paper and can fit together in paper, but until you start putting in cheek walls and actually building bridge components in 3D from 2D drawings on paper, you don't get the full picture on how challenging or how the two worlds are connected. So I think that would be my advice. And as we just said, don't stop learning, whether it's engineering, whether it's leadership, you know, strive for the hunger of wanting to keep learning and enjoy the process of solving problems.
That's good stuff. Well, once again, Kevin Gorman. Kevin's a licensed professional engineer, vice president, and civil engineering expert at Robson Forensic. You can learn about Robson Forensic at robsonforensic.com. You can find Kevin as well on LinkedIn. Kevin, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Great. It's a pleasure. And I enjoyed my time with you. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Kevin. Really interesting stuff. Forensic engineering is a very interesting field. Not only is it really a technical field like any field of engineering, but it also has an emotional side to it because you get involved with situations that can have tragic endings, unfortunately. And we're happy that Kevin could come here today and talk about it and talk about, the career that can be for a civil engineer who decides to get into forensic engineering. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to our channel here. We do put videos like this out on a regular basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.